A complex yet extremely useful way to visualize data is through a linear gauge. I'm going to click on the linear gauge now. There are a couple primary uses for this. One may be your score range determines whether you're a pass, fail, a good, a bad, a red, a yellow, a green. The linear gauge can be a great way to do that. Just like a gauge in your car might determine how hot something is, a linear gauge can do that as well. Another use for a linear gauge may be I'm more like a bird than a fish. So you have two ends on a spectrum or a continuum, and there is a scale that tells you which one you're closer to. I'll demonstrate both of these with a single graph, and I'll remove kind of the continuum concept. So to begin with the linear gauge, the first thing you want to do, like with all of the chart widgets, is to add scores. So maybe you have something here, percentage correct, maybe you have a percent overall, and let's just add a third score to make it percentile lookup. So we have three different values. If I click finish here in my linear gauge, it's not going to be very rich at all. You can see down here at the bottom, it's not giving us much data. So like most of our widgets, it can evolve quickly. Now, I mentioned in the beginning that a linear gauge a lot of times is on a color scale. So we can add ranges behind the scenes that says for this percentage correct, in the low range, maybe it's between 0 and 30. We'll just make these nice clean ranges. So we'll do 60 and 60 to 90, or 60 to 100 is the high end. So I'm going to do a red, yellow, green concept. So maybe we're in the red range when we're low. We're in the middle or yellow range, and yellow is a tough color, so I'll make it a really dark yellow. And then we'll have green in the high range. We'll see this come to life a little bit. So if I score between 0 and 30, I'm going to show up in a red, yellow, green range. You can see how this plays out. The other two lines on my linear gauge don't have anything, so I can choose to copy these, and this will take a second, but we can see these start to look better. So I'll start by copying my red colors, and then I'll fill this out quickly. One of the advantages of the linear gauge is you can really put a lot of data in a single chart, whereas some charts the system formats a lot of it for you. The linear gauge gives you a little bit more control. That can also be a drawback. As you can see, I have to key in quite a bit of information to make this look like I want. So I'm keying that information in now. So it's not for the faint of heart, but it really can bring that data together so it looks exactly like you want. I just need to get the green and the yellow in, and we'll be done. So it doesn't take that long, but maybe a little longer than clicking buttons on some of the other graphs. So I've created three scores in here. They each have kind of that red, yellow, green concept. You can't yet see what the scores are, which may be a little disturbing to some, but we do add a left label. So let's say we want to put the left label in here as correct. We'll call this overall, and we'll call this percentile. And then the graph will start to look just a little different. I can make some additional enhancements to this. Let's say I want to show the score names. I wouldn't have had to enter that. I can put that anywhere. Let's say this is on a continuum. So this was bird and fish type thing. So let's say this is bird and this is fish. I can also show it like this. So on one side you have fish, on one side you have bird, and then your score might show up there in the middle. I'm going to show some white grid lines just to see what that looks like, and I'm going to show our score with a check mark now, and I just changed a couple of values, and then the gauge starts to look a little different. So now if I score in this range, it's going to put me there. As you notice, instead of a score value, it's going to show a check mark. I could change this to be blank. I could change it to be a value. I could change it a diamond with an outline. So there are a lot of different ways that you can visualize this. So the specificity really determines what you want to use. We'll use score value. We'll keep it in black. We'll make it a background color of white, or similar to white. And I don't really like that look, but you could display colors as you want on that linear gauge. I'm going to take out this bird concept here on the right, but just know that you can right anchor any linear gauge that you would want. You could put tokens in if you need to put, I don't know, score name or something like that, client name in here. Tokens are available to add to these left and right anchors. You can also make them longer or wider. Let's say you have really long names. You could make this 2 inches instead of whatever the system defaults to. So it gives you some ability on each of the anchors to configure what that looks like. Don't love this background color, so I'll go ahead and take that out. I can change my font and want it to be Courier New, and I want it to be 10 instead of the standard font. So then your linear gauge starts to look just a little different. So I have this based, as you can see, from 0 to 10, the score of 12 posts between it, 50 posted between 50 and 60. I can also set this up instead of a continuum to be an interval. And we'll see what that looks like. So the scores start to, we'll see when it plays out, but interval and continuum just show how it shows whether it's on the bar, whether it's between. So kind of a specific feature, but we added that due to need. We can set the block inches. I'm going to put this something probably a little wider. So you can see now my gauge has spread out quite a bit based on that 2 inch. But some people have issues where I need this to be really small. Let's shrink it to something somewhat obnoxious. And I'm not sure if it'll do it based on the data we have, but yeah, so it shrunk it quite a bit. So if I need another graph over here, I might want my gauge to be a little smaller. If I have a lot of text on each side, that's another reason to size my block width to be something small. I forget what it defaults to, but let's say it's 1 inch. You can set your maximum, minimums, and your increments. If I set my increment to be a lot more, the gauge starts to look a little wider, a little not quite silly, but it gets pretty big. So we might have to reestablish what our block width is so we can fit that on the screen. So the linear gauge, the best way to characterize this, if you have a continuum, a right and left anchor, if you have something that spans a concept that color can represent well, like red, yellow, green in this case, a linear gauge is excellent for that. It's good for a single score that you want to display, but you're more interested in the numbers than the bars because maybe the numbers don't represent good or bad, whereas bar tends to look bigger equals better. So the linear gauge is good for that as well. The last thing that we can show with the linear gauge, you can title it. I'm not a big fan of the chart title, but you can see what that might look like if you finish and visualize that, so you have that at the top. We'll click on the display button and you can see what that looks like. Hopefully all our scores are within range, otherwise key in those values that you need. And then at the bottom here, we should see that linear gauge. We evidently didn't have any good values in those ranges. But anyway, so the scores would show up. So that's the linear gauge. Great visualization for anchored scores, for information that you want to show with background colors. It can come in really handy.